So we finished the first little section in Beitza. We did Psachim, very important in Psachim, and now we're going to skip to Ted Zayin Amud Aleph, where we did the very beginning. If you remember, where we had the Machlokas Rav Ashi, we had the Machlokas Rav Ashi and Shmuel Rava, whether the Eruv Tavshilin is Lechavet Shabbos, so you'll remember Shabbos, or Rav Ashi, who said that it's Lechavet Yom Tov and that you should remember Yom Tov. And according to Rav Ashi, we came out with the conclusion that there is no Isser D'Oraisa to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, but we make the Eruv in order that you should not forget Yom Tov for Kavod for Kavod Yom Tov. Okay, so we're going to skip now to Tet Zayin Amud Aleph. Again, there's a lot of interesting Gemaras here, but they don't have a lot to do with Eruv Tavshilin, and therefore I'm allowing us to skip them.
So where we done? Psachim?
So no, we finished the Psachim.
Oh.
Okay, that was the Psachim. The thing we needed from Psachim was the concept of Hoil, right? That where Hoil solves a D'Oraisa problem, okay, of cooking from Yom Tov to Shabbos, okay, and if you say Hoil, then you have no problem, and if you don't say Hoil, you have a problem, and therefore you need to have a different solution for that. That was the Psachim. We'll come back to that in Beitza. So we want Daf Tet Zayin Amud Aleph, halfway down the wide lines. We're going to access the part of the Mishnah. Maybe we should just remind ourselves of the Mishnah. Let's just quickly reread the Mishnah, the first part of the Mishnah, because that's what we need. Let's just reread on Tes Vav Amud Beis, just to remind ourselves what the Mishnah said that we're going to be talking about now. So again, Yom Tov Shechal Yos Erev Shabbos Lo Yivashal B'Tchila Mi Yom Tov L'Shabbos. You can't start your cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Aval Mevashal Hu L'Yom Tov V'Im Hotir L'Shabbos. Okay, you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, and if you have extra food, you would be allowed to eat it on Shabbos. But you're not allowed to start cooking on Yom Tov specifically for Shabbos. Okay, and then we continued, and this is the Eruv Tavshilin. I'm still in the Mishnah on Tes Vav Amud Beis, and then we said Osa Tavshil Me Erev Yom Tov V'Somech Alav L'Shabbos. All right, that you are allowed to start your cooking on Thursday for Shabbos, and then when you cook on Friday, all you're doing is you're continuing, and that's the lashon in the Mishnah. Lo Yivashel Adam Tchila. Lo Yivashel B'Tchila Mi Yom Tov L'Shabbos. You're not allowed to start cooking for Shabbos on Yom Tov, but you're allowed to continue cooking on Yom Tov. I say it backwards. You're not allowed to start cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos, but you're allowed to continue cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos.
So when the Mishnah says,
that's in the Mishnah.
When the Mishnah says Aval Mavashal Hu LeYom Tov, in this particular context.
Wait. Are you in the first part? Are you before we introduced Eruv or after we introduced Eruv?
After Eruv is introduced.
No, you what you just read is before we introduced Eruv. You're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos, but if you're cooking for Yom Tov results in extra food, you would be allowed to eat that on Shabbos.
Okay, Mevashal Hu LeYom Tov on Yom Tov, meaning you're allowed to make extra food, but you're allowed to make food on Yom Tov that you plan to eat on Yom Tov, and the leftovers you could eat on Shabbos.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. But you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos unless you started your cooking on Thursday for Shabbos. That's the second part of the mission.
Right. And you're also allowed to cook on Yom Tov, obviously, for Yom Tov itself.
That's the first din.
That's not a shaila b'chol.
Aval, the chiddush of the Mishnah is that the leftover that you cooked on Yom Tov, you're allowed to eat on Shabbos.
Right. And the heter for that is based on Hoil, no? No. I don't need a heter for that. I cook for Yom Tov. I have leftover food. Why can't I eat it on Shabbos?
I didn't cook it for Shabbos.
So where's the whole thing of Hoyle that people are going to come? That you're going to have guests? Where does that come from?
Hoyle allows me without an Eruv to cook on early on Friday. Right, even though I know that I'm needed for Shabbos because I could use it on Yom Tov. Hoyle allows me to say that even though I don't know that I'm going to have guests, since if I would have guests, I would be able to feed them. That's the Hoyle allows me to do it even without knowing that I'm going to have guests. And I don't need Eruv.
And that's cooking for Shabbos with the Hoyle is like, forgive me for saying.
On Yom Tov. I'm cooking on Yom Tov. Since I could say that I'm cooking on Yom Tov because maybe guests will come on Yom Tov, I can cook it even though I don't know that I need it.
Right. But I don't really need that Hoyle for the Mishnah.
If I have leftover food from my cooking on Yom Tov, of course I don't need Hoyle.
Then I don't need it. So I could just, lekatchila, cook more.
Okay, now we need to go to Tet
It gets into our
Danilo, now we need to go to Tet Zayin.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so look at right in the middle. It's the second two words on the line. Ose Adam.
How many lines into the long lines?
Halfway down the wide lines. The last two words on the lines are Ose Adam.
Let's see. Halfway. Ose Adam, yeah. 2 dots there. Yeah. There are 2 dots there.
Okay. Ose Tavshil me'erev Yom Tov v'somech alav. Right, Liyom. That's quoting the Mishnah of that introduced Eruv. Ose Adam Tavshil me'erev Yom Tov, meaning on Thursday, and then he can cook on Friday for Shabbos. That's the din of Eruv. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela tavshil, aval pat lo. In order to be allowed to cook on Shabbos, on Yom Tov for Shabbos, you have to start a cooking, a tavshil on Thursday, but not a baking on Thursday. So the idea of Eruv requires cooking food on Thursday for Shabbos, but you can't start baking on Thursday and use that as your Eruv to cook on Shabbos, to cook on Thursday for Shabbos. So the Eruv Tavshilin has to be a cooked food and not a baked food. Why? My shna pat delo. Why can't I start baking on Thursday and say I've started my preparations for Shabbos and let me cook on Thursday? Answers the Gemara. Proposes the Gemara. Ilema midi de milafet ba'inan upat lo milafta. If you're going to tell me that the reason why I can't bake is because I have to have something that is eaten with pot, okay? Midi, right? Midi de milafet ba'inan upat lo milafta. You don't eat pot with pot. You need to have something that you eat with bread, and you don't eat bread with bread. I need something that I eat with bread, and that's only a cooked food. Says the Gemara, it's not true. Hadaisa. Daisa is cooked wheat, like cream of wheat, cooked wheat cereal. Nami, delo milafta. A person doesn't eat cream of wheat cereal with bread. Where do I see that? Right? De Amar Rabbi Zera, Hani Bavloi Tipshai. These stupid Babylonians. The Achle Nahama ben Nahama. They eat bread with bread, meaning they eat cream of wheat, which is basically bread, and they eat it with bread, and that's stupid. So you see that you don't eat cream of wheat with bread, and yet you can use cream of wheat as an eruv. So you see that it doesn't have to be something that I eat with bread. So why can't I use bread itself? The Amar of Nechumi bar Zechariah Mishmei Da'abaya Me'arvin b'daisa. So I see that since I could use daisa for my eruv, I don't understand why I can't use bread for my eruv. Let's see, there's a couple of Rashis. The Rashi is Lo shanu. The Rashi is lo shanu, so just a little bit below where we are right now. Lo shanu dahave eruv, unless you use a tavshil, but not pot. So says the Gemara, maybe it's because you need something demilafe, liftan ba'inan, demuchacha milta she'asui l'shabbos. Okay? Upat lo melafta, person doesn't add bread, eat bread with bread. Hilkach lav muchacha miltahi, sharei b'chol yom yesh lechem. Again, the idea here is that on Thursday I have to do something that's clearly being done for Shabbos. Okay? So it's got to be something that I wouldn't normally eat every day, but bread I eat every day. So if I bake bread on Thursday, there's no indication that that's for Shabbos, because every day I bake bread. But if I have something else that I eat with bread, well, not every day do I eat something with bread. Sometimes I only eat bread. And that's why, says the Gemara, I should need, why bread shouldn't be enough. But the Gemara says, but you never eat daisa with bread, and yet daisa is good, so that can't be the reason. Ella, back in the Gemara. Ella midi de lo shchiach ba'inan upat shchicha. I need to do something on Thursday that I don't do every day. And I always do bread, so therefore I can't use bread as an indication that I'm doing something for Shabbos, because doing bread on Thursday could easily be done for Thursday. Okay? And therefore you can't use it. And daisa lo shchicha. And since daisa is not something I make every day, bread I make every day, so I can't use bread for my eruv. But daisa is not something I make every day, so I could use it for my eruv. Again, the message here is that the eruv on Thursday has to be done with something that is indicative of it being done as a preparation for Shabbos, and not something that I might be doing locally for Thursday.
Rashid, what if somebody only eats bread on Shabbos? Do we say that counts, or we make a low plug that the Gemara?
We're talking about normal people, okay? Once we have normal people, we talk about doing something that normal people do, okay? All right. There's another version which is exactly the opposite.
Excuse me, Rabbi, can I ask, people do bake challahs lichvot, the yontiv lichvot Shabbos. Right?
Let's not talk about what the current world looks like. In those days, people ate bread every day. They didn't eat other things every day. And therefore, on Thursday, you have to do something that you don't eat every day.
Okay.
That's all. It's got to be indicative that I'm doing something. It's more of a negative. I can't do something that I do every day and call that an eruv.
Okay.
It's more of a negative thing. Okay? I can't do what I do every day and call it an eruv. And since I eat bread every day, I can't use that for my eruv, because there's no indication that I'm doing that for Shabbos. Okay. I know what Daniel's thinking. Well, what about fancy bread? I don't do fancy bread every time, but that's not the issue here. Okay, that's one version. Now we have an opposite version. Ikadi Amre. Amar Abaya lo shanu ela tavshil. Only a tavshil. Aval pat lo. My timer. Why can't I use pot? Ilema demidi de lo shchiach ba'inan. You need something that's not normal. Upat shchicha. And the reason you can't use pot is because pot is done every day. Then hadaisa lo shchicha. And daisa is not done every day. The Amar of Nechumi bar Zechariah Mishmei de Abaya ein ma'arvin b'daisa. The opposite version. You cannot use daisa. So if I can't use daisa, then, and I don't cook daisa every day, so then if I can't use daisa, then why do I have to use tavshil? Why can't I use pot? Since you see clearly that it has nothing to do with every day. Elamidi de melafet ba'inenu pat lo melafta. The daisa nami lo melafta. The reason why I have to use a tavshil and not bread is because I need something that is eaten with bread, and daisa is never eaten with bread. And since it's not eaten with bread, I can't use tavshil and I can't use daisa. It has to be something that's eaten with bread. Again, it's a machlokas whether a daisa can be used for eruv. Okay, and that would give me the reason why I can't do pot. One reason why I can't do pot. Okay, because pot is eaten every day, or because daisa cannot be used, and therefore it's got to be just something that's eaten with pot. Again, two different things, but whatever there's a machlokas whether I can use daisa, but everybody agrees that I can't use pot. I can't use bread. Okay? All right. That is where I think that's, let me just see if that's where we're going with this Gemara. No, we have a little bit more to go. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is very important. Very important Gemara here. Well, you don't realize how important this next Gemara is. But you see, but you don't realize the Eruv that we do. Do we cook something special on Thursday for Shabbos? Do we always use do we do the Eruv Tavshilin? Here's the question. Think carefully. Do you do Eruv Tavshilin with something that you cooked on Thursday for Shabbos? Ephraim's shaking his head. He gets it right away. What do? I pull a hard-boiled egg out of the fridge that I cooked a week ago, and I take a piece of matzah that may be left over from Pesach or Shavuos, right? And I say, "There's my eruv." I take a piece of jar. I open up a jar of gefilte fish, take out a piece of gefilte fish. Okay, right? So wait a minute, Ephraim. I can't hear you. Go ahead, a little louder.
I've always been troubled by that. I've always been troubled by that because I'm not cooking.
That's what. Tell me what we're troubled by, so this Gemara will help you.
Well, it would help if I guess it would help if I really cook something.
In other words, you never cook. So no, this is a real problem. You got to think about this. The whole point of Eruv Tavshilin is to start my Shabbos cooking on Thursday.
What do you use?
Well, yeah, what?
What do you use for Eruv Tavshilin?
A hard-boiled egg and a piece of matzah.
Okay, I'm feeling much better. Thank you.
My mother used. That's my mother used. That was it. Okay. I think sometimes we'll take out a piece of jarred gefilte fish and a piece of that, but it doesn't keep as well. The hard-boiled egg keeps well. Okay. You realize also in Israel we don't have Eruv Tavshilin very often. In America, again, in my parents' house, Eruv Tavshilin was a hard-boiled egg and a piece of matzah. Okay. All right. So is that okay? It doesn't look like did I start my cooking? So let's see the Gemara. That's what this Gemara is going to open us up for. Tani Rabbi Chia. Adashim shebishule kidera. What is this? So you cooked a big pot of beans, okay, and you scooped out the beans. Now, usually you don't have a I don't what word am I using for an absolute scoop of beans that there's nothing left on the pot. Usually there's a little bit of beans left at the bottom of the pot, okay, that you didn't scoop out. So look at Rashi. Where is it? Yes. Shebeshule kedera shenisharu below miskaven. Meaning that I cooked my beans and I did not leave over the beans for Shabbos. I cooked beans for Yom Tov. All right, I cooked beans on Thursday and I left over at the bottom of the pot because I couldn't scrape it all out. There's a little bit of beans left over in the bottom of the pot. It says here that you're allowed to rely on those beans, and if you save those beans and eat them on Shabbos, that's your Eruv. Adashim shebeshule kedera. Somit alei mishum Eruv Tavshilin. The hanimili de isbu kezayis. But there has to be at least a kezayis of beans left over. Amar of Yitzchak Breder of Yehuda. Shamnunis she'al gabe hasakin. Gorero v'somech alav mishum Eruv Tavshilin. Apparently the meat there was very, very fatty, and you could cut meat and have a lot of meat left over on the knife after you cut the meat, and you can scrape scrape off the leftover meat on the knife and put that away and say that's my Eruv Tavshilin. Now it's lo miskave means you did not cook that meat for Shabbos. You cooked that meat for Yom Tov, but you had left over that you now are going to pull off the knife and designate that as food for Shabbos. Okay. Yeah, so that's as far as we need this going. Let's just see Rashi. Somech aleihem So again, Rashi is going to tell us what was your default and what's your chiddush. I mean, it sounds like there's a problem. You look at the Rashi, bishule kederish nisharu below miskaven. So Rashi is alerting you to the problem. Lo miskaven means you didn't cook those beans for Shabbos. You cooked those beans for Yom Tov, and you left them over. You didn't intentionally leave them over. It's not like you scooped out the beans and I said, okay, these beans are for Yom Tov, and I'm going to leave over other beans for Shabbos. You just scooped out the beans for Yom Tov, and there's leftover beans for Shabbos. When you cooked it, you did not intend that the leftover beans were going to be for Shabbos. Still says Rashi, Somech aleim me'erev Yom Tov l'shem eruv. You can rely on those beans for to eat on Shabbos as your eruv. The lo amrinan. Here's your default. Loch shivi ubatle. Those beans have no significance. You left it over by accident. So it's not even significant. There's nothing there. So it says no, that if you could, when you left them over, they're not batel, because if they would be batel, you can't designate something that's batel. So they're not batel, and then you can turn around and designate. So what it says in this Gemara is that you don't actually have to cook something that was intended for Shabbos, but you can designate something that was already cooked for some other purpose, and you can designate that for Shabbos. And Frank, make you feel better?
Yeah.
That's exactly what this Gemara is giving you. That this is how we do what we do. Without this Gemara, I don't think we could do what we do. We'd have to cook something on Thursday for Shabbos. We'd have to make a kugel on Thursday for Shabbos. Okay?
That's what we do, right? You know,
What do you do,
my wife cooks something special just for Shabbos, and
you do the Eruv on that?
Yes, and we set aside also one of the challahs just for Shabbos, and we mark it.
No, be careful. The challahs are not good. Pot is not good. Oh, I see. Our minhag is, well, we'll see. Our minhag is going to be
instead of your matzah. It's instead
our
of your
minhag
matzah.
is going to be two things, right? Two tavshilim. Okay.
Right.
Anyway, but it's clear from this Gemara. This is the Gemara that opens the door for us to be able to open up a jar of gefilte fish. Okay, you know that was bought 6 months ago,
right?
And take out a piece of gefilte fish, all right, or take a hard-boiled egg that was just happened to be in the refrigerator, and designate it as your eruv. This is the beginning of my Shabbos cooking. That's what this Gemara lets you do.
Right. I mean, this Gemara really minimizes the whole mahalach of Eruv Tavshilin.
No. What this Gemara does is it allows designation to be sufficient.
But that minimizes the whole.
Food. And by the way, but then you've got to eat. I'm sure Frank knows that you got to eat that egg on Shabbos.
Yeah.
You got to hold that egg. You got to make sure that egg lasts through Shabbos. As we'll see, what happens if that hard-boiled egg that you designated, if it disappears, or if by accident your kid ate it on Friday, what happens? That's going to be the next Gemara.
Right.
Okay, that's going to be the next Gemara. Okay, so now we're going to skip again. We're going to skip now to the top of the next page, because this has to do with Bishulei Yaakov that is going to just sidetrack us. And we're going to go to the top of Tet Zayin Amud Beis. Okay? Here we have a long piece now. Okay? Amar Rabbi Abba. Eruv Tavshilin Tzrichin Kizayas. All right, the Eruv Tavshilin needs a Kizayas. Meaning, you have to have a Kizayas of food prepared on Thursday for Shabbos. But there's an interesting question that the Gemara raises. Iboilu, Kizayat Echad Lekulam. Is it one Kizayat for the whole family? Odilma Kizayat Lekol Echad Ve'echad. You have to have a Kizayat of food for each person. Each person has to have a Kizayat of food prepared for them for Shabbos. And that's not unreasonable, because if the idea is prepare food, if there is a shear, remember, we could say that there's no shear. You don't need a little bit of food is enough. But once you're telling me that there's a shear of kizayas, then that opens the door for the possibility that every person who is relying on the Eruv has to have a kizayas. Okay, and that's going to be the question. So, Amar Rabbi Abba Eruv Tavshilin Shichin Kizayas. Iboilu Kizayas Echad Lekulon. O Dilma Kizayas Lekol Echad Ve'echad. So let's see. Toshma. The Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Eruv Tavshilin Tzrichin Kizayas Bein Le'echad Bein Le'meya. So we have an explicit statement of Rav that no, that one kizayis is enough for as many people as you want the Eruv to be. The Eruv has to have a kizayis, but it doesn't need to be a kizayis for every person. Okay, and that's again what we do. We take a kizayis of food for the whole family. Next, okay, good. And you see, we're going through these Gemaras. We're seeing how these Gemaras are the basis for what we actually do. Tanan, achlo osha ovad. What happens if you made it on Thursday for Shabbos, and on Friday somebody ate it, or it got lost? So when you're coming now to do your cooking on Friday, the Eruv is not there. Lo yivashel alav b'techila. What does it mean, lo yivashel alav b'techila? You can't start cooking if you don't have the Eruv. Shir mimenu kolshu somech alav l'Shabbos. But as long as a little bit of it is left, meaning as long as you didn't eat up all of it, then you can cook based on that Eruv for Shabbos. So the Gemara wants to make a deal here. My kolshu, what does it mean? A little bit of the Eruv left over, right? Lav afal gav deleki kizayis. Sounds like even a little bit is left over, and that's a proof that you don't need a kizayis. And the Gemara says lo de isba kizayis. No. When it says leftover, you got to have leftover kizayis. But there's an important deal here, where it says that if it gets lost or eaten, lo yivashel alav b'techila l'Shabbos. I think we mentioned this. Did we mention this last time? You're not allowed to start your cooking on Yom Tov, meaning once the Eruv is lost, you can't do any more cooking. But cooking that I did on Yom Tov based on that Eruv, the chiddush here is that you're allowed to eat. In other words, losing the Eruv doesn't retroactively invalidate the cooking that you did when the Eruv was there. It only prevents you from continuing any more cooking on Friday for Shabbos. That's what it says, lo yivashel alav b'techila. But if you cooked already, and you're, let's say, halfway through the cooking, whatever you cooked, you're allowed to eat on Shabbos. You're just not allowed to cook anymore. Okay, so again, that's why you got to, I think people are very careful to make sure that you put this happened. You want to mark the egg. If you use a hard-boiled egg, I don't know, do you do that, Ephraim? You mark the egg? You don't mark, whether you put it in a special place or you want to make sure you don't put it back in the basket of hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah. No. We put it in a cup and it doesn't get mixed up.
Okay, all right. And you got to make sure none of your kids go to eat it, okay? Right.
This
okay.
is the new thing to make a killing on the Eruv Tavshilin cups. You mark it and you're gonna sell that now, right? Like special.
But they sell a tub marked Eruv Tavshilin.
Right.
You don't have to mark Eruv Tavshilin.
Right, and you have one for Fleischig, one for Milchig, one for Parv, one for
anything. These marketers, anything to make a buck.
Right.
We were in America years ago for Pesach. And we're in the kosher store thing, and we could not believe one of the things that we saw. Packaged salt water.
You have the 10 pieces of chametz you have packaged now.
You
know what? Okay. A tub of salt water. Ephraim, did they sell that? Did they sell it in the kosher store? That never made it to Toronto.
How much was it?
You don't want.
They
don't want to know. But this was in Los Angeles. I think it was in Los Angeles.
They sell the pomegranate in Brooklyn. They have stuff like that. Yeah, it's like gourmet glot. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyway, but okay. Let's not make leitzonos of Jews and of the practices. When you have a lot of money, there's a lot of things to do with a lot of money. Okay. Continues the Gemara. So the Gemara tried to prove that you don't need a kazayas for the Eruv. And the Gemara says, no. When it says nishar kolshu, it means you had a big Eruv. As long as there's a kazayis left, it's okay. Toshma. Tavshil zeh. This tavshil. Tavshil means a cooked food. How does it have to be cooked? Tzli, afilu kavush, sholuk, mevushal, kuliyam ha'asfanim. We'll read Rashi to see what that is. Shenasan alav chamim, me'er of Yom Tov. Tchiloso v'sofo ein lo shir. So let's just learn the pshat there before we make the diuk of why it's relevant to the shear of kezayis. So it's sli, it can be barbecued, it can be pickled, it can be a flash cooked, it can be long cooked. What's kulyas ha'afsanim shenasan alav chamin me'erev yom tov? So let's see Rashi on that. That's a tricky one. Remember, we need cooked food. It's got to be a cooked food. So we're going to stretch the definition of cooked food here. It's the last wide line in Rashi. By the way, let's see. Sholuk is mevushal harbe, mevushal is kihilchaso, and right, and so it's got to be properly cooked. You'll notice what it says. Sholuk is very cooked, overly cooked. Mevushal is properly cooked, but apparently it has to be at least properly cooked. If it's still half raw, that's not good enough, and probably because it's not really edible.
What's kulyas?
Oh, so look at Rashi. Kulyas ha'asfanim. Kulyas ha'asfanim. Okay, so just a minute. I'm sorry, I just have a bad cold. Didn't get rid of it yet.
It's up. It's further up.
Yeah, so kulyas ha'asfanim, the Rashi, it's the last wide line in Rashi. So kulyas ha'asfanim, says Rashi, is a dag maliach. It's a salted fish, virach, and it's very soft. V'nechal kamot shehu chai. So it is a raw fish that's eaten. I guess nowadays we could talk about some kind of sushi, right? Raw fish. However, notnim alav chamin v'zebishulo. They didn't eat it purely raw. They just poured some hot water over it. Okay, and then they ate it. So it's really not cooked. But the way they ate it was by pouring some hot water over it. Okay? Kiditnan b'Masechah Shabbos, shahadachaso zuhi gemar malachto, and that's why you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, nasnu alav chamin gersinan sha'asu lo me'erev yom tov bishul haroi lo. Since this is the way it was, quote, cooked, this is the way it was prepared for eating, even though it's not really cooked. Okay, and so one of my chavru's, somebody wanted to say maybe something like lox. I don't know, how do they take smoked salmon? They don't really cook. Is lox cooked? What do they do with it? They take salmon and
smoked.
So it's not really cooked.
It's smoked.
Certainly today sushi. It's raw fish. Do they do anything with the raw fish? Or they pour any hot water? Just literally raw fish.
Should be raw fish.
Real raw, literally raw fish. Yeah, I'm not sure that would be good for. I don't think that's going to be good for an Eruv. Okay, there's got to be something done to at least represent some kind of cooking. Okay. Anyway, but why do we need all of this? Because
that's an important deal. But I mean, it means it's not food. Food alone is not enough. You couldn't take.
Got to be cooked food.
You couldn't take candy. Maybe candy because it's also not kosher, but I don't know if that's considered.
It's not kosher. It's got to be cooked. It can't be raw. It's got to be cooked. Okay. So, but it continues the bright. So, what are we talking? What are we saying? This is where we're going to be mendayik whether we need a kezayis or not. So, what is this ambiguous phrase tchiloso v'sofo? Says Rashi. What's tchiloso? Tchiloso means. Kisha tavshil, ein lo shir, kama yehebo, and sofo is ochlo o sha'avad v'shir mimenu tzas. Meaning, when you start, there has to be. When you start, there's no shir, and when you end up with it, as long as there's something left, there's no shir. Says the Gemara, that sounds like my lav ein lo shir klal, meaning there's no shir. All right, you can start with whatever you want, and you can end up with whatever you want, as long as you start with something and end up with something. But you don't need a kezayis. Says the Gemara, no. Ein lo shir lamala. What does it mean, ein lo shir tchila? So ein lo shir means there's no shir about how much, meaning you can have as much as you want. Aval yesh lo shir lamata. Ein lo shir means there's no limit on the top, but there is a limit on the bottom, and that is you have to have at least a kezayis. Says Rashi. My love ein lo shir klal, lo l'rav v'lo l'ma'at. Because ein lo shir means it doesn't matter how much or how little. That's what ein lo shir sounds like. Says the Gemara, no. Ein lo shir lemala. Lo mar shelo yosif bo al kach v'kach. It's not giving you any limitation about how much you can have, but certainly the least is going to be a kazayas. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now we get into all right. Here's now another very interesting halacha that we have, and we're going to see how it works. Yes. Josh, go ahead.
There's really a havamina that if you put too much food out, it wouldn't be a valid Eruv Tavshilin?
That's a very good question. The only answer I would have is that it could be telling you that your default is it's gotta be just an amount that somebody would normally eat.
Right.
In other words, if you put out so much that's not gonna be eaten, maybe. I don't know. You're asking a good question. Okay, you're asking a good question. I don't know the answer. I didn't see that anybody talks about that. Okay. Here we go to something very, very relevant that we don't realize where it comes from or how it works. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Eruv Tavshilin tzrichim das. Says Rashi, Eruv Tavshilin tzrichim das. What does that mean? Tzrichim das. Says Rashi, sheyedu shelashem kach nasu. Meaning you have to know when you're taking that food, when you take the egg and you take the matzah. Again, nowadays it's very easy because we have a whole yirotzon and we have a bracha. But in those days, what they're saying is you have to know that this food is being prepared for Shabbos with das. Okay? V'Ravuna lo piresh das mi. Whose das do you need? Do you need the das of the doer of the Eruv? Or now go back into the Gemara. Hold your finger in the Rashi, but go back into the Gemara. Pshita das meiniach ba'inan. We certainly need the da'as of the person who's doing the Eruv. Says Rashi, umifarshinan lo anan ve'anan ve'amrinan. Havadai, I'm back in the Rashi. Havadai. Shitalan dechi amar Rav Huna tzrichin das, daito de meiniach mihaboy. De'ihu adif she'oseu l'shem kach. He certainly has to have das that he's using this food for the purpose of Eruv. Mihu mi boilon da'as mi shehinicho litzorcho. What about the person for whom I'm making the Eruv? Kigon de aso zel litzorch chavero. Remember, we have the idea that I can make an Eruv for you. So if I'm making an Eruv for my friend, does he have to have das that I'm making the Eruv for him? Meaning, I have to ask him and tell him, hey, Joe, I'm making an Eruv for you so that you will be able to cook on Friday for Shabbos. Or not? Do I have to consult with him and let him know that I'm making an Eruv for him? Or no, I made an Eruv for him and he didn't know I made an Eruv for him. But in the middle of Yom Tov, I call him up. I go over to his house and say, I made an Eruv for you. So you who didn't make an Eruv, you can start cooking for Yom Tov for Shabbos because I made an Eruv for you. Okay, so can I unilaterally make an Eruv for somebody else or no? I got to ask him, do you want me? And then I, so to speak, I don't know, I become a shliach or something like that. But that's what he said when he said tzarich da tzrichin das. Does he mean that I also have to consult with the person for whom I'm making an Eruv? Again, one of the things you have to be careful about is not answering this Gemara's question by what we do today. Because what we do today is only going to be after we learn the whole Gemara. Toshma. Diavur de Shmuel me'arev akula Nahar. Shmuel's father used to make an Eruv for the entire city of Nahar. So what are we proving from that? Certainly, he didn't go over to every person in Ardoi to ask him or to tell him, I'm making an Eruv for you. So it's clear, according to this, that you don't need the das of the person for whom you're making the Eruv. Okay? You don't need his das. Rabbi Ami v'Ravasi ma'arva kulu Tiveria. Okay? And Machriz Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi mishalo iniach Eruv Tavshilin yavo v'yismoch al shali. So again, we're proving here that you don't need the das of the person for whom you're making the Eruv, because he announced whoever didn't make an Eruv can rely on my Eruv. Okay. So says Rashi. No Rashi. No Rashi yet. Okay, says the Gemara Va'ad Kama. Wait, how far out do the people? How far out can I make an eruv for other people? Amar of Nechumi bar Zechariah Mishmei de Abaya ad Chum Shabbos.
Isn't that pshita?
In other words, I can make an eruv for people who are within the Tchum Shabbos from where I am, but not further out.
Isn't that pshita somehow? Like, why would I have a havamina?
What's pshita, Daniel? Which direction is pshita for you?
Why would I have a havamina that I in Yerushalayim can make an eruv for people in Bnei Brak? Why would I think that? Or
How do you have a havamina, Daniel? Make an
Zaki
eruv for people in Katam.
I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
Why do you think that you can make an eruv in Harnof for people in Katamon?
Even that I think is a chiddush.
Okay, so once you have that, once you have the idea that I can make it for other people, are there any boundaries?
So
about how far out does my eruv work? How far out does my eruv work?
So the Shabbos boundary sounds like we have also the air of Tchumen, right?
Oh, don't please.
I know it's a totally different thing.
Don't mix up systems.
No, but
now read Rashi, because this Rashi is going to be very, very important. How we're medayik this Rashi. Rashi gives you the reason for din. Meaning, when it says when it says Amar Rav Nechumi bar Zechariah Mishmei de Abaya ad Tchum Shabbos, they put a limitation. If he wouldn't have said that, what would you have thought? What was he machadish?
That there's a border.
How far it goes? Was he placing a limit or was he placing an expansion?
I think he was placing a limit.
He's placing a limit. Meaning, before he said that, what did you think?
Atzof ha'olam.
As far out. So says Rashi, why is there a limit? You understand the problem here. You need a reason for the limit. Look at Rashi. Ad Tchum Shabbos. Ula omdim chutz l'tchum. So why doesn't it work for people who are outside the tchum? Lo hoya daito shel meniach aleihem. He wasn't thinking about them. V'lo olu alibo lezochra. It's not on his mind to think about people who are so far out. What does that Rashi say? Open mind. What does that Rashi say?
When someone makes an eruv, they automatically have everybody else in mind.
No, that's not what it says. No. You didn't. You skipped a few steps. It says the reason why somebody can make an eruv for other people is because he has das for them. That was what we said earlier. You need the das of the person making the eruv, but you don't need the das of the person receiving the eruv. But you need the das of the person making the eruv. And it says here, it's got to be people that he has das about those people. And that's why, go back now to what it said, Abu de Shmuel ma'ariv akul Nardoi, because Abu de Shmuel was ma'ariv for everybody in Nardoi, in the city of Nardoi, because he's thinking about them. So it says, how far out does it go? It goes to everybody that I'm thinking about. Who do I normally think about? It says here, I normally think about people who are only up to Tchum Shabbos. I don't think about people outside of Tchum Shabbos because they have nothing to do with me, because they can't come here anyway, because they're outside of Tchum Shabbos. They can't come here, and I don't think about them.
I think that maybe the connection is to that perhaps guests are going to come, but guests cannot come from outside the Tchum.
You're putting words into Rashi that it doesn't say.
I know that. I realize that.
That's not a good idea. That's not a good idea. This Rashi says to me that in theory, if the person who's making the Eruv had da'as on people outside of Tchum Shabbos, it might work. So you gave the truth is you gave a very good explanation why that would be unreasonable, because if they're outside of Tchum Shabbos, he can't even get to them to tell them he made an Eruv for them.
And also they can't come to me.
That I think it's more because remember, we got to let if I make an Eruv for you and you didn't make an Eruv, I got to let you know. Okay, so you see from that I don't really have to let you know. I can announce. I can make an announcement I made an Eruv for everybody. This is where we get, of course, everybody knows. Now you're connecting, is we have this idea of a Rav making an Eruv for the city in case people forgot or they didn't make an Eruv. This is where it comes from. But there's an important story. Let's get this in today before we have to break. Okay, there's an important story coming up. Okay. Hahu Samya. Hahu Samya. What's this Samya? Samya means a blind person. Dahave Misader Masnisa Kamei Demar Shmuel. He used to review, he's blind, so he can't read Mishnayos inside. So he used to review his Mishnayos every day in front of Shmuel. Okay, again, Hahu Samya Davi Misader Masnisa Kamei Demar Shmuel. Kazia Dahavi Otziv. One day he comes to Shmuel, and Shmuel sees he's very sad. He looks depressed. Amar le amai atzivas. Why? Shmuel says to the Samya, why are you depressed? Amar le delo otivi Eruv Tavshilin. I forgot to make Eruv. I forgot to make an Eruv Tavshilin. I'm not going to be able to cook now on Yom Tov. Amar le, don't worry. Smoch adidi. You can rely. I made an Eruv, and I had other people in mind, so you can rely on my Eruv. It doesn't imply that Shmuel had specifically this guy in mind. Shmuel made an Eruv with others in mind who didn't make an Eruv. Says Rashi. All right. Misader Masnisa Shahaya Yodea Mashnayis Begirsa. All right. Shia Megirsa Umechazer Aleim Lifnei Mar Shmuel. Shayus Duros Befiv Ki Ikran. He wanted to make sure that he got it right, so he used to chazer with Shmuel. So what did Shmuel say when he found out the guy forgot to make an Eruv? Smoch hadidi de amaravna akula narda. Shmuel said, I made an Eruv for all of Nardoi, so you can rely on my Eruv because I had everybody in Nardoi in mind. Shehi iro. Okay, good, fine. Continues the story. L'shana, says Rashi, l'shana acheres, another year. V'rosh Hashanah haya she'en yochel aniach v'lahatnos. Whatever, he couldn't make it. All right. Chazia dahavi atzif. Again, if it's on a 2-day yontif in Chutz La'aretz, so you can make an Eruv on Thursday. When yontif is Thursday, Friday, you may be able to get around making an Eruv without because it's yontif is really doraisa either Thursday or Friday. So again, that's I don't want to get sidetracked on that point. The guy forgot to make an Eruv again. So he sees that the guy's sad. Amar le amai atzis, amar le an delo siva Eruv Tavshilin. I didn't make an Eruv again this year. Amar le, so now Shmuel responds unexpectedly. Posheya at. You're a posheya. You forgot again? That means you're not taking Eruv seriously. And therefore, lekule alma shari lididach asur. My Eruv works for everybody. It doesn't work for you. Says Rashi. Lididach asur she'ein daiti ala mizidin ve'haposhim she'enam charedim lidivrei chachamim. When I make that Eruv, I have in mind people who forgot. I don't have in mind people who don't care. I don't have in mind people who intentionally, I don't have time for an Eruv, I'm going to rely on the Rav's Eruv. So it says in this Gemara, and that's the halacha brought in Mishnah Brura. We'll get to halacha. We'll see that's halacha lamaisa. Is that the Rav Ayer makes an Eruv, and it only works for people who forgot to make an Eruv. But somebody who says, I'm too lazy, I'm too busy, I'm going to rely on the Rav's Eruv, that's not good. You're not allowed to intentionally rely on the Rav's Eruv. It's only if you forgot, if you were nenas, only then does it work. The question is, you know what? Okay, I'll let Yehuda ask a question before I weigh in with the Rashi, with the Diukim in Rashi. Go ahead, Yehuda.
This guy was sad at the second time also, so it doesn't sound like that he relied on the rabbi.
Good.
He thought that, I don't have Eruv now.
So now read the Rashi again. Now let's read the Rashi again. Shmuel says, you're sad a second time, that means you're not taking Eruv seriously. When you forgot once, I understand. But you forgot again, that means you're not taking it seriously. When a guy forgets something, and because of that, he loses a lot of money, it's not going to happen a second time because it's important. All right? That's what Shmuel picked up. This guy isn't taking it seriously. No, he's just relying on me and not taking it seriously. So therefore, but I want to be medayik the words of Rashi and show you, I think, a chiddush, and we'll see when we get to the halacha whether my chiddush is correct or not. Shmuel said, "L'didach aser she'ein dati ala mezidim v'haposhim she'enim charedim l'divrei chachamim." Shmuel said, "I don't have in mind people who intentionally don't do eruv." To me, that sounds like a chacham, a rav of the city, could have in mind people who are mezidim, and if he did, it would work. Isn't that what it sounds like from Rashi? And I think that therefore nowadays. Who was it? Josh Penn is in Las Vegas. I was learning this with Josh Penn, and he was in Las Vegas. Now you had to do Eruv Tavshilin. You chutzlatz people know that you did Eruv Tavshilin this time. And Josh said, "I made Eruv." He's not the Rav of the city, but he's probably one of the most serious Torah Jews in Las Vegas. He said, "I made Eruv Tavshilin, and I had in mind every Jew in Las Vegas." Even though there are Jews who they don't know anything about Eruv, they couldn't care less about Eruv. He said, I was mezaka them so that when they cook on Friday for Yom Tov, they're not going to, for Shabbos, they're not machal Yom Tov. All right, even though some of them were probably mizidim, meaning, and I think I showed him from this Rashi, it sounds like that was okay, because all Shmuel said is, I didn't have in mind the mizidim. But if he would have had in mind the mizidim, it would have worked. Which is exactly what we saw in the Rashi about the Tchumen. The guy the Rav was making it there. He doesn't have in mind somebody is outside of the Tchum. Again, as Daniel pointed out, because the guy has no access. But in the city, one could have in mind the people who are Mezidim. He could. Shmuel is saying, I'm not going to. Okay, I'm going to penalize the guys. But he realized that penalty is going to cause Chil Yontif. Anyway, so we'll see when we get to the Halacha L'Maisa how that plays out. But I think in this Rashi, it sounds like Shmuel is saying, I don't have in mind the Mizidim. But he could have. Okay, I think that's as far then. All right, that's the end of this. Let me just see here. That's the end of this part. Yes. Okay, so we're going to pick it up next time on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to be skipping to Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. One more Gemara. And then I'm going to have a look. We may see a little bit of the Rishonim on these Gemaras that we did. Or then we'll be jumping to the Tur Beis Yosef, because it's pretty much, let me just see if I think that's all of the Gemaras in this parak that relate to Eruv Tavshilin. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, okay, we may do that part about the egg and the fish, but that's not so. We're going to do Yud Zayin Amud Aleph and go almost to the Mishnah on Yud Zayin Amud Beis, and then I'll maybe send a sheet with some Rishonim just to see some interesting Rishonim, and then we'll go to the Tur Beis Yosef. Okay?
Well, Rabbi, what you mentioned a little bit reminds of the Mechiras Chomet for people who are not so careful. It just reminds. No. Somebody says that I can do a mechiras chametz for a Jew who doesn't want to sell, doesn't think about selling his chametz. Well, that's what has been done by El Al Rabbanut for decades when James Richardson was owned by Jews. And I spoke to this rabbi, Rabbi El Maliach, and he said it might at least work for the Amaratzish Jew that walks into that store. So at least for him it might work.
You're not quite understanding what they do, because you're not understanding the ownership. You're not
the ownership was
let's not get sidetracked. I don't want to talk about the Mechiras Chametz, and I certainly don't want to talk about the duty-free shops in Ben Gurion over Pesach, what they do and what they're
not Jewishly owned anymore, already for about 3-4 years.
What?
They're not owned by Jews anymore.
So you mean you're allowed to go to the duty-free shops now after Pesach and buy whiskey?
That's what I understood.
There was only one duty-free shop owned by a Chabadnik that we know for sure sold his chametz, and he was closed during Pesach.
Right, and the Machzan was
all the other stores. The assumption is that the whiskey that they had there was chametz shavar lava Pesach, and people who knew what was going on didn't buy whiskey there till at least Shavuos, figuring that by that time they already had turned over their stock.
You can speak to Rabbi Zemelman. Rabbi Shmuel Zemelman. he's bucky on the whole thing, but I know that for about 4 years or 3-4 years.
Okay, things change.
been
Okay,
the
Rabbi.
same
So
ownership.
Bezrat Hashem will meet up again on Sunday. Ephraim, question.
Yeah, the nusach of the bracha contemplates the Jews in the city.
Yes.
Right.
In other words, that's the idea is that every Jew who's making Eruv Tavshilin has the ability to include other people. It doesn't have to be the Rav of the city. Correct. Yeah. But again, so the question then is, it's again, well, we'll this will push off till we actually get to the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Okay, but you're right. It sounds like Shmuel didn't do it because he didn't want to do it, but he could have done it. He could have included the people who were intentionally not making Eruv Tavshilin. Absolutely. Okay. Beseder. All right, I'll see everybody Bezrat Hashem on Sunday. Okay, everybody. See everybody Sunday. A good Shabbos.
The Shabbos.
Well,